Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The federal government's national strategy for quantum computing lays out broad goals, but a new GAO review finds gaps in coordination, accountability, and performance measurement across agencies. Federal Drive host Terry Gurton recently walked through what's missing and what updating the strategy could change with Candace Wright, Director of Science, Technology Assessment, and Analytics at the Government Accountability Office.
A recent report from GAO looks at how the federal government is coordinating its quantum computing efforts under the National Quantum Initiative, where it's spending about $200 million a year. As GAO looked at this, what stood out to you about how well those efforts are being guided right now?
Yeah, so GAO has actually been examining quantum technology development for about a decade, as it's been identified as something that's critical to economic growth, national security, for example. There's a lot of hype about its promise, especially because it has this ability for increased processing speed and power. And certainly with the National Quantum Initiative, there was, a commitment to really move forward. One of the things that we've certainly observed is that there has been movement in R&D. Number of different agencies are involved in various efforts. However, as we looked at this issue, one of the areas that is of particular interest is understanding what are the key federal efforts related to quantum computing and cryptography, especially as we talk about, moving forward with this technology. As an advanced quantum computer has the potential to have many applications in a lot of different sectors, support drug development, supply chain, logistics, improving financial modeling. We've heard of instances where like the Air Force Research Lab is looking at it to improve timekeeping proficiency or precision rather with an atomic clock, but, being concerned about energy consumption issues. However, we just were curious as to what is the strategic planning approach for investing in quantum, especially as we think about it for economic security and national security perspectives.
So this report does not dig into the quantum science itself. It's really looking at that strategy and how well the strategy is being managed. You noted that the strategy includes broad goals for quantum computing, but doesn't have the subordinate objectives and performance measures that would really help agencies and organizations know exactly what's expected. What does the absence of those metrics mean in practice?
So one of the key things is when you think about strategic planning, a lot of times people see it as a bureaucratic administrative effort, but it really is supposed to be a guiding principle. You have your overarching goals that you're working towards, but the subordinate objectives really tell you how you're going to get there. So they create these measurable steps. And we thought it was really important that as we were looking at these various strategic planning documents, because there actually wasn't a comprehensive strategy. So lots of bits of pieces of information spread across different documents. And so as we looked through that, it was really unclear as to what are the subordinate objectives, those, more micro activities, if you will, to achieve the broader overarching goals of partnering with industry or boosting the workforce, for example. And so as we talked with different agencies, we observed that in their view, the technology is in such an early stage that they thought it would be difficult to come up with those subordinate objectives. But again, if you have money being appropriated or designated, allocated rather to achieve these goals and efforts, we think it's important that you are able to articulate how that money is being spent, where we're making progress, where there might be gaps, and where there might be corrective actions needed to continue to move forward.
Part of what adds to that complexity, I think, is that the strategy identifies participating agencies but doesn't clearly define roles and responsibilities, and it's not always clear who exactly is in charge at any particular point in the strategy. Why is that so important in a space like this that cuts across science, defense, and economic competitiveness?
So one of the things that the National Quantum Initiative Act did was it established a number of different coordinating bodies, if you will, to lead the effort on quantum science, and particularly around quantum computing. We've actually identified that there are 4 different coordinating bodies, each with slightly different roles. And we think it's really important to be clear about roles and responsibilities, again, so that you understand who's taking the lead on what, where there might be complementary activities versus duplicative activities, and then also really being able to clearly demonstrate who will be taking the lead on certain efforts, and creating those opportunities for partnerships across federal agencies, but also with industry and academia who also have equities in this space as well. So it's important to ensure that there are these coordinated efforts so that you can help improve the planning and coordination while also ensuring that you're avoiding unnecessary duplication.
And did you get a sense from the agencies involved that even though those relationships might not be specified, they had a good handle on them, or were they as confused as GAO was?
We got the sense certainly that there is a community of people with this expertise who are working together and have been participating in different activities at various levels. I think one of the key things that's important is that there can be a lot of movement across agencies and across administrations. And so we think it's really important, again, not to do this purely for an administrative or bureaucratic approach, but really to be able to document what are the common goals, the shared agreements, shared understanding of who's doing what with respect to roles and responsibilities, so that it is not dependent on having one particular person around who has all of the knowledge, especially when there's the possibility of lots of movement across federal agencies, but also between industry, academia, and the federal government.
I'm speaking with Candace Wright. She's Director for Science, Technology Assessment, and Analytics at GAO. Ms. Wright, the report also points out that current funding levels are documented, and we mentioned that $200 million a year up at the top, but that future resource needs, including infrastructure, are not documented. So how does that gap affect long-term planning for success?
So again, when we think about the fact that quantum technologies are described as a nascent area, developing, emerging area, we think it's important really to understand what the needs are, what resources might be needed, what facilities and infrastructure or equipment might be needed. And so while we did observe that in certain budget documents, there was an accounting of, as you noted, about $200 million per year since fiscal year 2020, it's really important to understand, is that enough for whatever the goals and the objectives are to be able to meet the current needs, but also to meet the future needs as well? We know certainly that there is a need for specialized facilities and equipment. There's a need for test beds. And these facilities are user facilities that researchers may want to use to be able to continue to advance the research in this space.
You mentioned investments in infrastructure, but one of the other key factors to making sure this strategy becomes reality is investment in a workforce. And this raises the subject of the quantum workforce in the way that we've heard about the cyber workforce or other sorts of tech-related specialties. What did you find regarding the readiness of the workforce in this space?
So this will be the Achilles heel, as often happens with any emerging technology. If you don't have the workforce with the specialized skills, it's really going to be challenging to make much progress. One of the things that we've certainly observed since one of our technology assessments back in 2021 was that there were these workforce concerns. It's really difficult sometimes to define who is a quantum worker. Again, because this is an emerging area, some of those things have not yet been fully defined. We know that in this space, it's a multidisciplinary approach. And so you might have individuals with, let's say, PhDs who are experts in physics, for example, but you may also need folks who have engineering skills as well, who are really skilled in mathematics. And so we've observed that it's been really challenging for agencies to conduct and do that assessment of the quantum workforce to identify what is really needed, how do we know what we have, and then what is going to be needed in the future to be able to close those gaps. Certainly a number of agencies have implemented various STEM programs and workforce development efforts to try to boost awareness about these opportunities, even starting as early as some of the K through 12 programs all the way up through PhD and postdocs. But again, this is not something that you're going to be able to home grow overnight. There are very limited academic degrees, if you will, that are so narrowly focused. And there might be some opportunities to take a course in quantum physics, for example, or quantum science. But we really need a truly coordinated, comprehensive approach to ensure that we understand what the workforce needs are and how we're going to get there.
You've given us a pretty clear picture of the challenges in this space. What does GAO recommend, and who's got the responsibility to close some of those gaps?
So as we did our work and identified where there are gaps in the strategic planning approach, we did make a recommendation for OSTP to work with other agencies that are part of the quantum science subcommittee to augment and update the national quantum strategy, again, to be able to address those gaps that we identified with respect to establishing those subordinate objectives that align with the overall goals, making sure that we're monitoring progress and determining resources and investment needs. We did make that recommendation to OSTP. While they didn't affirmatively agree or disagree, they did note that they had no concerns with the recommendation language. I will note that, there's been a lot of legislative activity with regard to the National Quantum Initiative Act, which is actually going to be up for reauthorization soon. And so there's been a lot of legislative activity thinking about how to move forward. And so we think that the work that we've done, our findings, as well as the recommendations, can be really helpful to provide Congress and other key parties with the necessary information that's needed to move forward.
Candace Wright is the Director for Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics at GAO. We'll post this interview along with a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.